Back to the nutritional medicine and the adjunctive management of Parkinson's disease. As I'm saying, it's a much needed area. I run a program for the Allegiant Clinic where I'm seeing a lot of Parkinson's patients who are benefiting from the natural interventions that I'm going to walk you through in this presentation. So without further ado, let's get started. The premise of the webinar is that the medical management of Parkinson's disease does not really cure the disease or forestall its ultimate progression and the patient's demise to the extent that is possible, according to available human clinical trials and documented anecdotal reports. So the truth is that nutritional medicine, combined with targeted exercise therapy and other lifestyle interventions, are shown to augment medical treatment and Parkinson's disease management to a significant degree, providing patients with improvement in various Parkinson's disease signs and symptoms and or significantly slowing the progression of the disease. And these are huge considerations. So what I'm saying is that the medical management alone doesn't apply all the very best evidence that's available to give people the best chance at slowing their disease down, having better quality of life. So this is really where you come in. So what really caught my attention was back in the year 2002, this study that was published in the journal The Archives of Neurology in 2002, called The Effects of CoQ10 in Early Parkinson's Disease, Evidence of Slowing of Functional Decline. So the researcher here, the head researcher is Clifford Schultz, who you see here. And Clifford Schultz is a neurologist who taught at the University of California, San Diego. He's a neuroscientist who taught neuroscience courses at the School of Medicine there. He also was a neurologist at Veterans Affairs in San Diego. He unfortunately died of cancer in the year 2007, but not before publishing some very important, groundbreaking studies looking at CoQ10 and Parkinson's disease. And the other medical doctor of note here is Dr. Kieburtz, Kay Kieburtz, who's also a medical doctor and researcher looking at CoQ10. So I'm going to take a few minutes just to give you the research paper highlights, because this was really a groundbreaking study that sort of got things moving in a very good direction. And then other studies came along after that looking at other nutrients that could be of great importance, which I will share with you during the course of this hour. So the research paper highlights start with this. The cause of Parkinson's are not fully understood, but genetic abnormalities and environmental factors have been associated with Parkinson's. So but the good news is that 90% of Parkinson's disease arises from sporadic mutations versus only 10% that are strongly genetically inherited. And so that's important because it's with the sporadic mutation Parkinson's where you can probably have the greatest impact using nutritional medicine, and that's the majority of the patients that are out there. So the recognition that this particular neurotoxin called the MPTP can actually cause Parkinsonism by inhibiting complex 1 in the mitochondrial electron transfer chain became a huge eye-opener, and it's stimulated a lot of further evidence. And it showed what we've seen is that mitochondrial dysfunction plays a huge role in triggering Parkinson's disease and in the ongoing damage that gets done, in the decline in nerve cell function and nerve cell death, and that there are certain chemicals that can actually induce this type of damage. So this particular neurotoxin, the MPTP, is actually used in different types of animal studies when you're looking at neurodegenerative disease animal models, but it's used as a Parkinson's disease animal model neurotoxin. So that's part one. So let's just revisit the complex 1 in the cytochrome chain in the mitochondria. So remember, cytochrome 1, you have NAD, is picking up hydrogens from different intermediates in the Krebs cycle, and then it's handing it off to FAD, complex 2, then complex 3. And as the hydrogens go down this step-down transformer system, energy is given off It recouples ADP with inorganic phosphate to make ATP. And the cells need this ATP energy to make dopamine in the first place, and also to keep itself alive and functioning in a normal way. And so what you're going to see is that in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, the major defect that never gets talked about is that the ability for complex 1 to grab this hydrogen electron and transfer it to complex 2, and actually the complex 3 as well, as you will see, becomes a major defect. And so less energy is being produced, and with that lack of energy, you run into an inability to synthesize dopamine, and so you see, well, where are these hydrogen electrons going if they're not being passed along the chain? They're leaking out through the mitochondrial membrane into an oxygen-rich cytosol in the nerve cell, interacting with oxygen and generating all kinds of reactive oxygen species with tremendous free radical damage that leads to nerve cell death. And so this is a major function or dysfunction that occurs in Parkinson's. And so you'll note that it's CoQ10 that actually transfers the electron, the hydrogen electrons from complex 1 to complex 2 and also to complex 3. And what we see in Parkinson's disease, and what Clifford Schultz identified, as you'll see momentarily, is that Parkinson's disease have much lower CoQ10 levels in their substantia nigra cells in the brain, and also in their platelets and systemically. And we think this might be what's actually triggering Parkinson's disease to a certain degree, and then perpetuating the ongoing deterioration that occurs in these patients. So once again, you see that the central role played by coenzyme Q10, shuttling the hydrogen electrons down from complex 1 to complex 3, so that energy can be produced and so that electrons don't leak out and generate free radicals in the cytosol of the cell. Now, other researchers reported a selective decrease in complex 1 activity in the postmortem substantia nigra in patients with Parkinson's disease. And then Parker and fellow researchers, not Dr. James Parker, but another Parker, reported, and others have confirmed, a decrease in complex 1 activity in the platelets in patients with Parkinson's disease compared to controls. So a major underlying defect in Parkinson's disease that no one talks about is that you have this complex 1, complex 2, and complex 3 defect in the mitochondria of Parkinson's patients. They're unable to make the ATP energy to keep the cell functioning in a normal way and to make the dopamine that's normally made in that part of the brain. So the likelihood that a reduction in complex 1 activity plays a role in the pathogenesis of Parkinson's was strengthened by the demonstration that patients with early untreated Parkinson's disease have reduced activity of complex 1, 2, and 3 in mitochondria isolated from platelets, and that treatment with levodopa and selexylate hydrochloride, these are things that raise dopamine levels, don't actually affect mitochondrial function. The possibility that a systemic insult to the mitochondria could preferentially injure the nigral dopaminergic neurons, so the substantia nigra cells that make the dopamine, and these are the cells that are affected here, are also, that complex 1 in those cells is also selectively damaged by an insecticide, pesticide known as rotenone. And upon exposure to rotenone, these cells have an impaired complex 1 activity, and they undergo degeneration that's significant, and they're unable to make the dopamine that's necessary for normal cell function. So these things all are pointing, this is all pointing in a particular direction. So CoQ10, as I said, is an electron acceptor for complex 1 and 2. It's also a very potent antioxidant. So not only does CoQ10 normally shuttle electrons down the electron transfer chain at complex 1, 2, and 3, but it's also an antioxidant to help quench free radicals in the vicinity of the mitochondria, where a lot of free radical damage tends to occur. So Parkinson's patients have very low levels of CoQ10, allowing these complex 1, 2, and 3 defects to actually take hold to a large degree And then with the free radicals that are being generated, the CoQ10 isn't there to mop it up. So Clifford Schultz and followers had already demonstrated reduced levels of CoQ10 in the mitochondria, isolated from platelets of patients with Parkinson's disease, and that they have low serum levels of CoQ10 compared to age-matched controls who had already suffered a stroke. So Parkinson's seems to have this specific propensity for decreased CoQ10 versus other brain damage conditions. And then Beal demonstrated that oral supplementation with CoQ10 reduced the loss of dopamine and dopaminergic axons in the striatum of 1-year-old rats treated with this neurotoxin. So in animal studies, when you treat them with the neurotoxin, but you provide CoQ10, the damage doesn't occur. The dopamine neuron function remains intact because the CoQ10 can help to keep the complex 1, 2, and 3 function going so they can make ATP energy to get the energy to make their own dopamine. And then Matthews showed that oral supplementation with CoQ10 in rats resulted in significant increases in the concentrations of CoQ10 in the mitochondria in the cerebral cortex. So studies have shown that CoQ10 supplementation crosses the blood-brain barrier and can actually get into the nerve cells and into the mitochondria to actually perform this task of being an electron acceptor and a donor, and to provide antioxidant properties. So before 2002, Schultz had already done a study with Parkinson's patients to see if they could tolerate high doses of CoQ10 as supplement without any adverse side effects. And the initial study showed that high doses of CoQ10, up to 800 milligrams a day, was very well tolerated. So then in this 2002 study in the Archives of Neurology, they said, well, what we want to see now is we want to determine whether different doses of CoQ10 are safe to take and well tolerated, and can they actually slow the functional decline in Parkinson's disease patients. It was a multi-center, randomized, parallel group, placebo-controlled, double-blind study using different dosages of CoQ10. They had 80 subjects who had early-stage Parkinson's disease who did not yet require any type of L-DOPA treatment or any medication because they were early stage. So these individuals were given different doses. Either they got the placebo, which had 0 milligrams, or they got 300, 600, or 1,200 milligrams per day. And here's what the results showed. The CoQ10 supplementation was safe and well tolerated up to dosages of 1,200 milligrams a day. That's a lot of CoQ10. And that the higher the dose, the better the results. Less disability developed in subjects assigned to the CoQ10 than in those receiving the placebo. And the benefit was greatest in subjects receiving the highest dose. The higher the dosage, the greater was the benefit, the more they were slowing down the progression of the disease and stabilizing it. CoQ10 appears to slow the progressive deterioration of function in Parkinson's disease patients, and then these results need to be confirmed in longer studies. In 2005, Schultz actually published another study showing that he could confirm the results of this particular clinical trial. And unfortunately, he passed away in 2007. So that's what happened in 2002. That should have been a gigantic stir throughout the neurological community. And, all the patients that I've seen so far, or Parkinson's patients who have seen it all, just not one has been administered CoQ10. Now, I know that some neurologists do administer CoQ10, but where I live, it's very few and far between. So what's happened since 2002? Well, since 2002, there's been enough, this was sort of opened up the floodgates, and all kinds of studies started to be done to look at other nutrients. And we've seen now that a number of nutritional interventions, not just coenzyme Q10, can modulate key underlying pathophysiological events in Parkinson's disease and improve patient outcomes and their quality of life. So unfortunately, in the majority of cases, neurologists and conventional medical management have not largely embraced the results from its available clinical and experimental studies and incorporated evidence-based nutritional medicine into the global management of Parkinson's. The other thing is this, that a number of the patients that I've seen have already seen a naturopath before they get to me. And in in not one instance yet have I seen the naturopath use the very best available evidence on human clinical studies of Parkinson's. They've had some good ideas and they've done some things right. There's no question about that. But not one of the patients I've seen yet from a naturopath has a patient on coenzyme Q10. They often tend to jump ahead and start giving them products that will provide L-DOPA to the brain and do some things to raise glutathione. These are all really good ideas. I'm not knocking it. But there's some things that are missing in the protocol. So you can't just leave it to other third parties to do this. You need to hit the target. And so the nutritional programs that I provide, I know are the ones that really should be implemented by practitioners such as yourself. So here's what the clinical need is right now. We need experts, especially experts that already have a background in neurology, to be able to perform a Parkinson's disease specific exam to determine the stage of the disease process. And the reason that's important is because if you have really advanced Parkinson's disease, nutritional medicine is very unlikely to be helpful at that point. Once almost all the cells are dead and substantially niger, the best nutrition in the world isn't going to bring them back to life. You also have to understand how Parkinson's disease medications work. You can't just start throwing supplements and dietary things at people. And understand the other prescribed medications they might have, to understand if the medications they're on allow you to provide nutrients that are synergistic to the treatment plan and to stay away from things that are contraindicated. If the patient's already on an L-DOPA drug, already on levodopa, you can't be giving them Buchanan pruririn, which also adds more L-DOPA to the brain because you're actually going to overstimulate dopamine in the brain and produce more damage than a benefit. You're going to produce a lot of dopamine oxidation, create lots of free radicals, and actually make the patient worse. So you have to understand how these things fit together. You have to understand the patient's current blood work, especially their liver and kidney function. These patients who have Parkinson's are usually older patients over the age of 60 or 65. So you need to understand their liver and renal function and other blood work, and also understand what medications they might be on that might be a major contraindication to what you want to do. So as an example, coenzyme Q10 in its molecular structure looks very, very similar to vitamin K. And as such, in rare situations, but it sometimes occurs that CoQ10, when you're giving a person warfarin to block vitamin K activity, to block these carboxylase reactions, so the body can't produce as many clotting factors, so you then thin the blood. Well, CoQ10 can step in and start performing carboxylation reactions to actually make clotting factors and counter the effects of warfarin. So you have to understand the drug-nutrient interactions associated with various nutritional factors I'm going to talk about, so that you can guard against this or have the right monitoring in place. So it's not one size fits all. Show me the cocktail. I'm going to give all my Parkinson's patients this cocktail. It really has to be customized to the individual's specific needs. And understand that these patients are older, they have comorbidity problems, they have polypharmacy, they're taking different drugs because they already have diabetes or high cholesterol, other things going on, and you have to be able to sort all that out when you go to make your customized recommendations for that individual. So you want to be able to identify nutritional medicine interventions, including the right dosages that are personalized to the patient's need to slow the progression of physical symptoms and signs. You also want to identify the nutritional medicine interventions that would be most helpful to prevent Parkinson's dementia, which is a huge part of what happens later in the disease. So if they don't have dementia yet, that has to be on your mind in advance to give the brain the best chance for dementia not to show up down the road. And then you have to address other secondary factors, like they might have sleep problems, very common. You need to help them design the right exercise program based on their capability and give them direction towards cognitive awareness. So there's a fabulous book called The Brain's Way of Healing. It's written by Dr. Norman Deutsch, who's a medical doctor and a psychiatrist. Just coincidentally, Norman was a chiropractic patient of mine back in 1990s. I don't think he would mind me saying that. He's a wonderful guy, and he's a brilliant mind. He's gone on to become a hugely successful author and researcher. But in chapter 2 of this book, it's called A Man Walks Off His Parkinson's Symptoms. It explains how using your brain to bypass the basal ganglia can allow someone with Parkinson's disease to have all kinds of normal movement and normal function if they understand how to use the brain in a cognitive way to bypass the automation of the basal ganglia. It's a brilliant chapter that I have all of my Parkinson's patients read. So how big is the Parkinson's problem? Well, it's a big problem. It's the most common movement disorder, and it's the second most common neurodegenerative disease after Alzheimer's disease. So in the U.S., 50,000 new cases a year, 1 million U.S. citizens over the age of 60 are walking around with Parkinson's disease right now. And 1% of all Americans older than 65 years old. In Canada, 1 in 500 people develops Parkinson's disease. There's 100,000 Canadians living with Parkinson's disease, and about 6,600 new cases a year. And the truth is that these people need your help, and I know that because I see these patients, and I help them using the strategies, those things that I'm sharing with you during this hour. So it's a big problem that requires other practitioners who have a strong background in neurology to step in and put the missing pieces in place. So again, the basic pathophysiology in Parkinson's that is characterized by a loss of dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra, leading to a dopamine deficit in the striatum, because those nerve fibers extend into the striatum. We'll see that in a minute. So essentially, the dopamine-dependent nerve pathways run between the basal ganglia, motor cortex, the cerebellum, and the spinal cord. And dopamine is required to smooth out normal body movements and prevent involuntary movement. So when dopamine levels drop off in these pathways, then movements, you get spasticity and rigidity. It's hard to initiate movement. It's hard to stop movement. You get tremors and shaking because dopamine is smoothing all of these neurological components out. So death of cells in the substantia nigra result in loss of dopamine's effect, which result in tremors, rigidity, spasticity, and slowing of movement. So once again, in the substantia nigra, you have these cells that are generating the dopamine, sending it along different pathways to the striatum. And then there are extensions, of course, to other parts of the brain, including the motor cortex. So we see it here, the connection between the substantia nigra, the basal ganglia, the thalamus to the motor cortex, to the spinal cord. So it becomes this movement disorder that is due to a lack of dopamine. Just giving people drugs that will raise their dopamine is not a good enough answer. That's the medical solution so far. Increasing brain levels of dopamine reduces the resting tremor and related symptoms of Parkinson's. So it does work, but it's a temporary benefit. See, the effects of dopamine treatment start to wear off, and then the disease progresses again. And this is because dopamine treatment, as it raises dopamine in that part of the brain, a lot of that dopamine undergoes auto-oxidation, generating free radicals that further damage those nerve cells and actually cause nerve cell death, and then the nerve is completely non-functional. So medical doctors usually don't try to prescribe L-DOPA or dopamine-raising drugs until the disease has progressed to a certain point, because they know the effect's going to wear off, and then those nerve cells are going to die at an even faster rate, and then the person is in even bigger trouble. So just so you understand dopamine autooxidation, dopamine is a very unstable neurotransmitter. It undergoes oxidation to the dopamine O-quinine, which causes further mitochondrial dysfunction, generates synthesis of alpha-synuclein, these proteinaceous deposits that lead to Lewy bodies and Parkinson's dementia, and generate further oxidation itself. And then this can undergo subsequent change to other free radicals, the aminochrome version, and also the 5,6-hydroxy indole quinone. But these oxidized products of dopamine actually further damage it. So when people go on to drugs like L-DOPA to raise your dopamine, or if you give them natural products like the Nutritional prurines, which I will talk about, then understand that as you raise dopamine, you're also increasing the risk of auto-oxidation and more of these free radicals being generated that can actually do a lot of harm along the way. So the question is there anything so far that could stop the auto-oxidation of dopamine? Wouldn't that be nice to know? Well, fortunately, there is, and I'm going to show you that in a moment. But basically, what this slide is saying is that these dopamine oxidation products actually create a lot of the further damage that gets done to the nerve cell over time. So how do you reduce dopamine auto-oxidation with nutritional medicine? Well, there's been some encouraging studies in recent years. Number one, vitamin D, because it raises what's known as the glial-derived neurotrophic factor in the brain, it's been shown to actually reduce the damaging effects of these oxidized dopamine products in animal studies. And so one of the things that's important is to make sure the person's vitamin D level is in the ideal range. A lot of the neurologists don't talk about that to the patient. Melatonin has also been shown to inhibit damage done by these oxidized dopamine products in the Parkinson's experimental studies with rodents, study in 2009. And also N-acetylcysteine and selenium raise glutathione levels. It's been shown to be helpful. More glutathione can quench a lot of these dopamine-related oxidation products. And so that's something else to keep in mind. And the epigallocatechin gallate from green tea, studies are showing that it can also protect against like the neurotoxin-induced dopaminergic neuron damage to the substantia nigra. There's a lot of evidence that green tea has protective effects across the brain for a lot of things, not just Parkinson's, but also Alzheimer's disease. So if a person's on L-DOPA, the doctor's already put them on that, or you're giving them Nutritional prurines, which has a lot of L-DOPA in it, and it can raise dopamine levels in the brain naturally, then concurrently, I think it's important that you also add to that cocktail enough vitamin D to make sure your blood level is at 85 to 150 nanomoles per liter. If you're in the United States, that would be 34 to 60 nanograms per milliliter. And 1 hour before they go to bed at night, I'd be giving them 3 to 5 milligrams of melatonin, unless there's a reason why you can't do that. And N-acetylcysteine at 600 milligrams twice daily, and have them drink 5 cups of green tea a day, or have 300 to 600 milligrams of decaffeinated green tea, standardized to 50% polyphenols, to get enough of the sort of catechins or epigallocatechin gallate polyphenol available for the brain to sort of step in and prevent damage from these oxidized dopamine products. And I'd have them on a high potency multivitamin that has 100 to 200 micrograms of selenium. So I normally would give them the Aviva multivitamin. It has extra vitamin C and vitamin B50 complex, 200 micrograms of selenium, 1,000 I use of vitamin D. So that's usually what I do with respect to the high potency multivitamin. But let's get back to the medical treatment. Just raising dopamine by itself is useful, but you can't raise dopamine by giving people dopamine as a drug. Dopamine itself doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So what doctors have to do is give people L-DOPA, which is a precursor to dopamine, but they also give them dopamine decarboxylase inhibitors, so they want to be able to stop the degradation of L-DOPA before it crosses the blood-brain barrier, so the brain can get as much L-DOPA as possible. Once L-DOPA gets into the brain, the surviving substantia nigra cells can take that L-DOPA and convert it into dopamine via the DOPA decarboxylase enzyme. And the DOPA decarboxylase enzyme requires vitamin B6 and magnesium as coenzymes and cofactors. And when you give people Nutritional prurines or L-DOPA, the increase in this enzyme often depletes vitamin B6 and magnesium levels, and so usually these patients require some additional B6 and magnesium to enhance the activity of that enzyme. So let's just look at how that works for a moment. In our bodies that are working normally, when you have foods that contain phenylalanine and or tyrosine, they can become L-DOPA. They cross the blood-brain barrier. These are aromatic amino acids. They cross the blood-brain barrier using these two different enzymes which require folic acid, by the way, tetrahydrobiopterin are the cofactors that need folic acid for that. But once you have L-DOPA, using B6 and this decarboxylase enzyme, the brain normally forms dopamine, and you need some magnesium there as well. And then with vitamin C, you form norepinephrine, and then with S-adenosylmethionine, it can go on to form epinephrine. And to form S-adenosylmethionine, of course, you need folic acid and vitamin B12. That's why I like high potency multivitamin. And it's folic acid and B12 and vitamin C and vitamin B6 and magnesium, sort of all in a high potency formulation. Now, L-DOPA was first combined with other drugs in 1970s, so the first real major drugs for Parkinson's showed up around 1975, and then later they discovered that other enzymes could actually break down L-DOPA, so sometimes the patient is given other drugs that inhibit the catechol-methyltransferase enzyme as well. But supplementation with B6 and magnesium is a consideration to help the dopamine decarboxylase enzyme work and enhance the drug effects. But be aware, and this is critically important, that high doses of B6, if you give them doses that are too high, the vitamin B6 itself causes neurotoxicity and can actually make the symptoms worse. I recently saw a Parkinson's patient who was taking nucanapurin, who was put on very high doses of B6. And some of the symptoms the person was having was due to the high B6 levels, creating ataxia, rigidity, spasticity, because B6, excess B6 gets stored in nerve cells and can cause nerve damage itself. So I don't like to go higher than 50 to 75 milligrams a day of B6. Sometimes I see people coming in on 100, 200, 300 milligrams of vitamin B6. I'm like, this is actually creating some of the symptoms that look like Parkinson's disease. And when the person goes off, you start to see. And realize that high-dose magnesium can aggravate compromised renal function. These are older patients now. You need to know what their kidney function is, what's their creatinine level and their estimated glomerular filtration rate. If they have compromised kidney function, and you start giving them high doses of magnesium, you're going to cause hypermagnesemia, which can create all kinds of disturbances and lead to a heart attack and other organ damage. So you can't just randomly throw in these super high doses of these nutrients. You need to understand where the cutoff points are based on the person's entire profile. So when do the signs and symptoms appear, and what is sort of the goal of what you're intended to do? So here's the really bad news. The motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease result from the death of dopamine-generating cells in the substantia nigra. This is where the disease is coming from. By the time the patient has the very first symptoms of the disease, the early tremor or shake or slow movement, by the time it's detected for the first time, 60 to 80% of the dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra are already dead. So any intervention you come to the table, you're starting very late in the game. And if you have a person that's early stage, you're not going to bring those dead cells back to life. What it is that you want to do is you want to help optimize the function of the remaining substantia nigra cells that are still alive, and slow or halt the synthesis of Lewy body formation, these sort of proteinaceous deposits that damage the cells further, and preserve their memory and cognition by also maintaining the memory chemical acetylcholine as well as norepinephrine and epinephrine. This is the goal of what you're intending to do. So the causes of cell death are poorly understood, but oxidative stress and decreased ATP production appear to be significant factors. So of course, in the early stage of the disease, you have these, mild involuntary tremors, some shaking, some rigidity, slowness of movement can sometimes be the first symptom, difficulty walking with gait. But when this disease becomes more progressive, you get the behavioral changes, and you get the depression and the dementia, and autonomic changes that can become very advanced and sometimes beyond what nutritional interventions can do. But the consequent dysregulation of the basal ganglia circuitry allows the most prominent symptoms to occur that you're likely to see: slow movement, partial or loss of movement, rigidity, the resting tremor, the postural instability, and then you see advanced to autonomic problems, sleep disturbances, depression, cognitive impairment, as it becomes more widespread. These are what Lewy bodies look like in the central nervous system. They're a common component of what's known as Lewy body dementia, often seen in the sporadic form of Parkinson's disease and also in the more genetic form. And with Lewy bodies, you can also get hallucinations as part of the consequences. So the sporadic versus the inherited form, I'd say that the good news is that in the sporadic form of the disease, primarily the defects, the different genetic defects are affecting mitochondrial integrity. And that's a workaround. You can work around some of that with CoQ10 and creatine and alpha lipoic acid, nutrients that actually support energy production, help the transport of electrons down the cytochrome chain, and mop up free radical damage around the mitochondria and blocking some of the mitochondrial DNA damage. Nutritional interventions can do that. Whereas where you have this autosomal dominant form, where the primary genetic defects are increasing the synthesis of alpha-synuclein, we haven't seen any great studies yet to show that a particular nutrient can block the formation of alpha-synuclein. I mean, stopping dopamine oxidation is certainly a part of that, and you want to do that with the nutrients that I spoke about earlier. But where you can have the greatest impact is on mitochondrial function. And so, fortunately, 90% of the Parkinson's patients, that is where the underlying defect is most significant. So in that sporadic form, what you get is this defect in the complex 1 cytochrome function in the mitochondria in the substantia nigra cells, resulting in decreased ATP production, so they have trouble now synthesizing dopamine, but hopefully you can reverse that. And also there's an increase in reactive oxygen species as the electrons leak out of the mitochondrial membrane, right? And then also as the electrons leak out, you start to damage not only free radicals in the cytosol, but you also get free radicals damaging the mitochondrial DNA itself, creating mutations in the mitochondrial DNA. And the mitochondrial DNA don't have the same amount of repair enzymes as the nuclear DNA. It's very, very susceptible to damage that becomes permanent. You can't correct the base pair mutations that are undergoing. And once the DNA mutations are in place, then the DNA, when the mitochondria cells are mitochondria are dividing and generating new mitochondria, those defects are being passed along, so the cell has this worsening and worsening of mitochondrial function over time. And you want to try to slow that process down or halt it to the best of your ability. So just to get that one last glimpse of it, remember that brain cells, unless you're in a state of severe ketosis, brain cells are using glucose as their exclusive source of energy. So remember that glucose in the cytoplasm undergoes glycolysis down to pyruvic acid. You make a little bit of ATP, but you don't make very much ATP. And then pyruvate then is going to diffuse through the mitochondrial membrane, and with the help of pyruvate dehydrogenase, which of course needs niacin, riboflavin, pantothenic acid, these B vitamins, as well as alpha lipoic acid and vitamin B1 thiamine as cofactors. It'll form acetyl coenzyme A and combine with oxaloacetate to form citrate. And now we're into the Krebs cycle. And then in the Krebs cycle, NAD and FAD can pluck off the hydrogen electrons and bring them to the cytochrome transfer chain that we saw earlier. And now the hydrogens are being passed along the step-down transformer system. As the energy is released, it produces ATP energy at different points to keep the nerve cell functioning normally and to make dopamine in the substantia nigra to do all the great things that it's supposed to do. And here's just another look at it, showing CoQ10's important role in transporting those electrons down the chain. And here we see it again, and here we see it. Just remind you, because we saw these slides earlier, but now they should be even more meaningful to you. So CoQ10 and Parkinson's disease. So we know this, that complex 1 and to a lower extent complex 3 of the electron transfer chain are considered to be the main, that's the main site of reactive oxygen species that's causing so much of the damage in Parkinson's disease. Just giving the person L-DOPA and decarboxylase inhibitors does not address this key functional underlying pathophysiology. And this is where medical management has fallen down in my view. CoQ10 is an essential component of the electron transfer chain where it accepts electrons, passes them along, and it's also an important lipid antioxidant in that area. The decline in CoQ10 synthesis and aging increases reactive oxygen species and decreases ATP production. Even if you don't have Parkinson's disease, as you get older, you make less CoQ10. And it may be that in Parkinson's prone patients, once they reach a critical level of CoQ10 depletion, the disease can be treated. So oxidative stress accumulation and mitochondrial dysfunction have been implicated in the pathogenesis of Parkinson's disease. Post-mortem studies have consistently shown high levels of oxidation of different components in the substantia nigra of the sporadic Parkinson's patients, and they also have altered antioxidant defenses. In addition to mitochondria, autooxidation of dopamine generates all kinds of free radicals, which also further damage the dopaminergic neuron. So you want to try to intervene there as well. And this dopamine-dependent oxidative stress is believed to partially explain the selective vulnerability of dopaminergic neurons in PD. So you say, how come the rest of the brain cells aren't affected in Parkinson's? It's because dopamine is so prone to oxidation as a neurotransmitter. And in that part, when the cytochrome chain starts to break down, and there's more free radicals, and dopamine can then be generated into more oxidized products, you're getting the selective damage to the substantia nigra instead of other cells in the brain. So what are the goals of nutritional supplementation in Parkinson's disease? These are the 8 things that you would like to be able to achieve once you have the expertise. You want to help optimize and restore mitochondrial function. You want to increase synthesis with not just CoQ10, but secondary agents to help increase dopamine synthesis and to generate more antioxidant endogenously. You want to decrease free radical damage from reactive oxygen stress and also from dopamine oxidation products. You want to help maintain memory and cognition so that dementia doesn't set in as the person's disease goes on for a number of years. You want to try to increase dopamine synthesis if the person's not yet on dopamine raising medications. You want to address sleep issues using natural interventions. You want to customize an exercise program for them, and also show them the importance of cognitive movement and bypassing the basal ganglia. So let me give you the highlights of what falls into these different categories. It takes a number of hours to actually explain the details behind all of this, which I do teach in that extensive course in the nutritional medicine and neurology on the Global Integrated Medicine platform. But these are the highlights. To help optimize and restore mitochondrial function, the most important thing that we do is coenzyme Q10. And not one of the Parkinson's patients that I've seen in the last 3 months, anyone's prescribed CoQ10 until they got to me. You also want to increase ATP synthesis with secondary agents. So not only can CoQ10 increase ATP energy, but studies on Parkinson's patients also show that giving them creatine monohydrate, increasing the phosphagen stores within the nerve cells, generates more energy to recouple ADP with inorganic phosphate. They make more ATP energy, and the Parkinson's symptoms are controlled much better. You also want to decrease free radical damage to the best of your ability, as well as sort of decrease dopamine oxidation products. And once again, CoQ10 being this multimodal molecule is at the central figure of this, but also alpha-lipoic acid. And just like CoQ10, alpha-lipoic acid also declines with age. Not only is it an important antioxidant to mop up these free radicals, but it also raises glutathione levels, and it's an important cofactor for pyruvate dehydrogenase to get energy synthesis started in the first place. Also a high-potency multivitamin, extra antioxidants, 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, 400 IUs of vitamin E, 200 micrograms of selenium, and so on. And then N-acetylcysteine has been shown to be helpful to raise glutathione levels, something that it does with alpha-lipoic acid. So we saw that earlier. We talked about dopamine oxidation products. And remember the role of vitamin D in helping to preserve these nerve cells, and melatonin, and selenium, and epigallocatechin gallate. All of these work synergistically to help block free radical damage coming from the mitochondria leaking out and also from dopamine oxidation products. You want to address both sources of free radicals. And how do you help maintain memory and cognition? Well, if you sat in on the webinar that I did last month on concussion, then you'll be an expert already. And the understanding that CDP choline is the form of choline that best is going to allow choline to cross the blood-brain barrier. And then once you have choline esterifying the phospholipids of the nerve cell membrane, that choline can be cleaved off and formed into acetylcholine, which is the most important memory chemical. And so just giving choline by itself in a person over the age of 55, the choline transporter is not working nearly as well. It can't cross the blood-brain barrier nearly as well and become acetylcholine, the choline in the brain. So CDP choline, to make a long story short, this is the form of choline that actually gets it done, that raises brain levels of choline, phosphatidylcholine, and acetylcholine, which are required for memory, but also CDP choline has been shown to raise dopamine synthesis as well, and possibly norepinephrine. And you make more of the phosphatidylcholine when you have omega-3 fats, particularly DHA. So omega-3 fats become an important part of the strategy. And then I give some additional choline in the form of lecithin. And once again, the antioxidants and B50 complex from the multivitamin are helpful in this process of synthesizing these particular molecules and preserving nerve cell function. So if there's early dementia that's already noted, then I might add our product called the Diva Memory Support that has other agents that help to support acetylcholine in the brain. But most of the Parkinson's patients probably you're going to see are not going to be yet in a stage of dementia, hopefully. You also want to increase dopamine synthesis if they're not yet on medications. How do you do that? There's a natural supplement called the Velvet Bean, called mucaniporins. You can buy that has specific standardized grades of L-DOPA and give that to the patient. It'll raise their dopamine levels and they'll feel better, but you also have to make sure that you're containing the dopamine oxidation products with the nutrients I've been showing you. CDP choline, as I said, can raise dopamine levels. And also you need the B6 and magnesium and folic acid and so on to actually help the brain make dopamine to the greatest degree on its own, as these cofactors are important. If they have sleep issues, you're going to consider melatonin unless they're on a medication that would preclude that. And then there are specific exercise programs for Parkinson's disease that have been developed that are sensational. One of them is called Rock Steady Boxing. And there's also some physiotherapy-based customized Parkinson's programs that are out there that are specialized programs for the Parkinson's patient that have good evidence behind them. So you might want to read up on that. And you should read The Brain's Way of Healing by Norman Deutsch to understand the importance of cognitive factors in bypassing the basal ganglia. People say, where are you getting all this information from? So I provided the references for you. Remember, you're going to get a copy of this webinar so you can go through it more slowly at your leisure. And I would suggest that you read these research papers if this is of interest to you. Endurance exercise has been shown to be very helpful in slowing the progression of Parkinson's disease. The same with strength training if it's done properly. And once again, that chapter in The Brain's Way of Healing, I can't recommend it too highly. So some final considerations for you as we start to wind down. What about preventing Parkinson's disease in the first place? Because it ties into the anti-aging. We know that there's a decline in CoQ10 and alpha-lipoic acid synthesis in all of us as we get older, which decreases our ATP synthesis and increases reactive oxygen species and causes mitochondrial damage. The same thing happens in Parkinson's. We also, in all of us as we get older, there's a decline in dopamine synthesis to some degree and decreased receptors and binding sites, numbers of receptors. And that's why a lot of people, if they get older, they have just very fine tremors. And people, they don't swing their arms as much as they get older. And we're less thrill-seeking as the dopamine levels drop in our brain. So it might be that increasing our dopamine levels after the age of 55 or 60 might be in everybody's best interest. We saw a similar thing with the melatonin relationship to Lou Gehrig's disease in animal studies, where there's melatonin in transgenic mice that are prone to Lou Gehrig's disease. If they run out of melatonin, it triggers a disease, but if there's enough melatonin there, it stimulates the anterior horn cells to maintain their melatonin receptors. Melatonin stimulates the receptors, and the anterior horn cells don't die, and the disease doesn't get triggered. So it might be that a drop in these nutrients actually helps to trigger Parkinson's in susceptible people. And we all have a decline in the amount of choline that can get into the brain as we get older, running into acetylcholine deficits and sort of dementia and risk of further dementias and Alzheimer's disease. Remember that 60 to 80% of the substantia nigra neurons are already dead by the time Parkinson's disease manifests. So in all of us right now who don't have Parkinson's, we might actually have it. This might already be underway to a degree. We just don't have clinical symptoms yet. I'm thinking maybe we should think about preventing. So if you were going to do some preemptive measures, because there is no cure for Parkinson's disease, so maybe preventing it is part of what we should be looking at going forward. This might be of particular interest to people who have a family history of Parkinson's, is that introducing CoQ10 at age 45 and alpha-lipoic acid and DIVA memory support and some eucanopurines and creatine monohydrate. I do some of these things now at my age, as well as the DIVA multivitamin and, of course, essential fatty acids. Some of these things might actually prevent these biological steps that are linked not only to aging, but also to Parkinson's disease onset. So what are your next steps to consider? Well, I would really love for every practitioner to do this 100-hour online certification program that I have in nutritional medicine and sports nutrition. I think every chiropractor, every kinesiologist who's dealing with patients who they might have these problems should really develop this expertise. But if you just are looking for a shorter version, if neurology is your major interest, in that 20-hour program that I have in nutritional medicine and neurology, which really gets into the depths and gets down into the weeds and gives you true expertise. I can only do so much in 1 hour. That might be a consideration. Remember that if you do all the 6 courses for the 100-hour program, it qualifies you to be a registered nutritional consultant practitioner, registered orthomolecular health practitioner with the IOMC, the International Organization of Nutritional Consultants. I belong to that group. I use my registration number when I'm treating Parkinson's patients or doing nutritional medicine consults. I give the patient a receipt, not with my chiropractic registration on it, but with the ROHP designation. It's honored by a whole lot of insurance companies. That allows the patient to still have the chiropractic coverage for hands-on chiropractic work. And some of the supplements that I spoke about today, I actually formulated for DIVA, the high-potency multivitamin, and DIVA memory support complex. And I created one that raises glutathione levels. It has N-acetylcysteine, alpha-lipoic acid, silymarin, and L-glutamine. And you can see the links there if you want to go learn more about those particular DIVA products. So remember that we are going to send you a link to this recorded webinar so you can see it again, go through it more slowly, read all the slides, look at those references, do some reading on your own. But I hope this gave you a nice high-level view and got you thinking about it in a meaningful way to understand that there's tremendous evidence behind this. And I want to thank you for taking time in your busy day to spend an hour with me. And I encourage you to keep using your unique skills to help people. It really does make a difference. And I want to thank you again for your interest in my work and my teaching method and materials. So on that note, I will bid you a good day. Thanks again for watching. I'm very honored you spend the time, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.